Hi there, and welcome to The Wrap, simple news summaries for busy people, brought to you by me, Varashni Pillai, and the rest of the Explain team. So, things are getting politically spicy in South Africa. So, like a cold glass of milk, we're here to break all that heat down for you. From former Eskom CEO Brian Molefe's recent State Capture Commission testimony, insinuating that President Cyril Ramaphosa is a running dog of white monopoly capital, to Jacob Zuma and allies steadily losing the battle as the net of justice closes in on them. Then there's the latest race for car and a healthy way to do your bit. Speaking of health, are social media likes bad for you? Instagram CEO thinks so and is phasing them out. And the good news, the prophets of doom around South Africa's vaccine strategy seem increasingly wrong, and Treasury has found an additional 30 billion rand under the proverbial cushions. Let's dive into today's edition. First up, our take. Expect fireworks as Zondo Commission winds down. The State Capture Commission has been running for more than 2 years, but after requests for extensions and more funding, it must wrap up at the end of this month. And that's when things will get interesting. All those who have to respond to other testimony that implicated them must do so in the next few weeks. We're looking at you, Jacob Zuma, but also President Cyril Ramaphosa and the rest of the ANC top six. And things are already heating up. Former Eskom CEO Brian Molefe again made waves with his testimony this week. Recap: Molefe allegedly helped the Guptas capture key coal contracts at Eskom and later infamously told the nation of the Saxon Wall shebeen in an attempt to explain his frequent appearances at the Guptas' residence. Now Molefe is painting himself as a crusading savior against white monopoly capital while at Eskom. He claims he gave coal supplier Glencore the boot because they were holding a gun to Eskom's head with high prices, poor coal, and treating its black executives like children. Now, while corporate racism and evergreen contracts that milk SOEs like Eskom really are a problem, we must call BS on this one. After all, Eskom, under Molefe's leadership, drove Glencore's Optimum coal mine into business rescue with penalties for poor coal, then helped the Guptas buy it with a guarantee plus a huge and irregular prepayment when the family couldn't get bank loans to complete the purchase. Surprise, surprise, the Gupta's subsequent coal contracts for that and another mine also delivered poor coal and high pricing. Molefe also continued his dog whistling to the radical economic transformation crowd in his testimony with not so subtle hints that Glencore used its relationship with Ramaphosa, who was formerly the chairperson of the Optimum coal mine, to try to extort money from the power utility. But here's the rub: Ramaphosa was no longer involved in the company at the time. As 702 breakfast host Bongani Bingwa put it in a tweet, Molefe has no proof that Ramaphosa acted against the interests of Eskom, but he is raising them anyway. Just in case they could be true, if Mudslinger was a person, we can't help but agree with Bingwa. It's a lot of insinuation and nothing really to back it up. It's just creating a lot of division and anger. It's all part of the ongoing battle between reformers in the ANC and those who are implicated in state capture. That's not to say that the likes of Ramaphosa, Pravin Gordhan, etc. are perfect, but it's difficult to take accusations against them seriously when they're made by those so clearly trying to deflect from their own wrongdoing. On to the big story of this week: the road to Nkandla and to justice. Speaking of wrongdoing, it's been a bad week for former President Zuma and his allies. Following the ongoing drama around Zuma's refusal to appear before the Zondo Commission, the Constitutional Court announced this week that it would hear the case of contempt against him on the 25th. Our bet is that Zuma will find a way to backpedal and testify before Zondo after all. This after the Commission's lawyers argued for what would be a pretty stiff 2-year prison sentence for failing to appear before the Commission. Now, this is considered quite stiff because contempt of court usually draws no more than a 6-month sentence. Now, Zuma's foundation was obviously astounded and promptly released a puzzling statement implying that the man from Nkandla, who must answer dozens of allegations, was always ready to testify. But this is despite him literally refusing to do so previously. It's like they live in opposite land. Meanwhile, the political spectacle of trips to Nkandla continues unabated. Imagine if you or I got such special treatment for breaking the law. This time, former South African chairperson, aka court-ruled delinquent director, Dudu Myeni, delivered groceries to the homestead so Zuma could keep feeding his visitors. She said that Zuma was just a poor pensioner who, quote unquote, has no shares in any mining company. This was clearly a dig at Ramaphosa and the whole Glencore drama we just spoke about. She also went on to say that she wanted to give the little that she could afford with her family, i.e., Zuma's family. This is literally an LOL statement from Mieni. How about she share some of that monthly 300,000 Rand she was allegedly getting in kickbacks from Bosasa, as its former COO, Angelo Agrizzi, previously told the commission. Remember that famous story of how he was trying to butter her up, so he delivered a Louis Vuitton bag stuffed with the said 300,000 Rand. So yeah, no, we don't think she's just sharing the little that she has. Another Zuma ally, Busisiwe Mkhwebane, will now officially face an impeachment hearing before the National Assembly. This is the first of its kind. It took a while to get here, despite Mkhwebane's repeated court defeats, showing her to be almost completely incompetent. That's because it's a serious step and matter to remove a public protector, as they're meant to be independent and hold government to account. Now, an independent panel has argued in a damning report that there is sufficient evidence that she's guilty of both misconduct and incompetence, based partly on her alleged bias against some of Zuma's political opponents, like Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan. So what's next? A party vote and then another, wait for it, inquiry. We know what you're thinking, death by inquiries, but hey, at least the truth is coming out. All the above politics have released a renewed war of words on social media and elsewhere, particularly by Zuma's supporters. Whatever you read, be sure to check the facts. Moving on to your briefs from this week. Seatbelts for social media. What's a social media influencer without their likes? Instagram has been floating the idea of making this a reality for a few years now, given growing concerns around mental health. The platform has tested out what they call Project Daisy, so called after the little game we did as kids of Does She Love Me or Does She Love Me Not? They've been testing this out in a few countries, but on Tuesday, a bug affected users who were not expecting it, causing a minor uproar given the influencer economy that Instagram and its likes fuels. However, the new look still shows comments, but only a user can see the likes that they have received. It's similar to when you post on your Instagram stories, which is a feature that inspired the current project. Is this the future of social media? As Business Insider reports, Facebook, which owns Instagram, previously experimented with doing the same very briefly in September 2019. Twitter CEO has hinted at wanting to remove public likes from tweets for years now. After all, people have literally died from things like bullying and suicide, and elections and democracies have been undermined. The larger philosophical question is how we mitigate the unintended harm of social media, a relatively new and scarily powerful phenomenon. To use the New York Times analogy, if Instagram were the first Model T Fords, it now needs to start installing seatbelts, airbags, and other safety features. Removing likes may be the first step towards doing that. Back into the politics that have been rocking South Africa this week, a DA-Ramaphosa partnership. Is the DA really thinking of partnering with the ANC? Well, sure, maybe, but no, of course not. Don't be ridiculous. This is the sort of mixed message the party has sent out after a prominent Sunday Times article featuring its leader, John Steenhuisen. In it, he doubled down on previous hints that the party would partner with reformers in the divided ruling party as long as Ramaphosa remained at the helm. Steenhuisen must have come under serious pressure afterwards because he has since said he was misrepresented in the article. The real issue here is that the DA has lost mass appeal with its swing towards white conservative voters, and because there's a fairly trusted president leading its main competition, the ANC. Steenhuisen insisted the party was not becoming the quote-unquote IFP of the Western Cape, which is a great analogy actually for what may be exactly the case. Speaking of Cyril Ramaphosa, we were tickled to see two commentaries published simultaneously on News 24 and Business Day this week. One said that Ramaphosa was on the back foot in the ANC and wouldn't win a second term leading the party and would be forced out. The other said the exact opposite. Similar to the rumours that are currently circulating of a cabinet reshuffle and Tito Mboweni possibly being replaced as finance minister, our advice is, as always, wait for the facts, which of course we will bring you. Moving on to some entertainment news, not much love on this island. And the latest in race news, because this is South Africa after all, a rather weak reality show made international headlines for all the wrong reasons. The local iteration of Love Island evoked opprobrium for featuring a completely unrepresentative, mostly white cast. Publications like The Guardian, CNN, and BBC featured this very small local story because it was a fairly big deal. Now, Lotto Star, a local lottery company, has pulled its sponsorship, and Mnet, who airs the show, says it is committed to diversity, which would apparently become more apparent in future episodes. They just stopped short of an actual apology. This follows on another race-based uproar in the last week after ENCA senior reporter Lindsay Detlinger landed in hot water while interviewing politicians after last week's budget speech. A series of clips showed her interviewing white parliamentarians without a mask, but insisting that their black peers don theirs. She has since apologized and said she is not racist. ENCA has defended her, while several political parties have protested outside the station or taken action elsewhere. Both incidents are classic cases of unconscious bias. Confronting our implicit positive leaning towards people who look like us is normal, albeit wrong. It's important for us to tackle these personal prejudices. There are tools online to help you do it, and it's far more empowering than shouting racist at each other. In other news, Treasury finds an additional 30 billion rand under the couch. Remember all that hand-wringing over having to maybe raise our taxes to cover vaccines? First, that didn't materialize after tax revenue was better than expected. Now, following last week's budget speech, it's looking even better. After the budget, experts and parliamentarians usually debate what came out of it in various committees. In one of those committees, it appeared the country's budgeting shortfall could be up to 30 billion rand smaller than Titum Mbowene's projections in last week's budget, which was based on January's revenue figures. This is according to PwC tax policy leader Kyle Mandy, Business Day reported, who made the presentation in the committee. Now, this is SARS's equivalent of finding an extra $100 buried under the cushions or in your favorite jacket pocket. But in this case, it was an extra 30 billion rand and was thanks to better than expected collections of corporate and personal income taxes as well as VAT. It's great news, but we're still a little worried about all those cuts to social spending, as is Michael Sachs. He is the deputy chair of one of those party committees that debated the budget this week, and a voice we take seriously as someone who has previously actually headed Treasury's budget office. Citing cuts to spending in health, education, and on social grants to prove his point, Sachs worried that these would constrain the state's constitutional obligations to its population. On to some positive news. South Africa seems pretty on top of the vaccines after all. Now look, there were a lot of prophet of dooms lamenting problems with South Africa's vaccine negotiations. Then we landed 1 million AstraZeneca doses and it seemed like all would be well. But then those were found to be less effective against the local variant. Cue even more prophecies of doom. So it's really nice to see that things are ticking along quite nicely after all. As of yesterday, over 76,000 health workers have been vaccinated. Vaccination sites are currently being expanded, and once all 1 million health workers have had a turn, phase 2 will start around May. This will target the elderly, public-facing service workers, and those with comorbidities. The Solidarity Fund was also able to raise an additional 500 million rand towards the effort, it was reported this week. Half of this came from its own account and the rest from new donations. So that's also really good news. And after all the AstraZeneca and COVID variant drama, we're getting more Johnson & Johnson shots, which is a huge relief as this is effective against the local variant. Another 80,000 doses of this particular vaccine landed at Ora Tambo International Airport from Brussels earlier this week. This is after the initial 80,000 batch that was previously disseminated to health workers. And those AstraZeneca jabs that we purchased won't go to waste after all, if Mkhize is to be believed. He says they'll be sold to other African countries in a win-win situation. We'll watch and let you know when it happens. But remember, we're nowhere near out of the COVID woods. In case you missed it, on Sunday, Ramaphosa held a family meeting and we were collectively taken out of the naughty corner. We're now on level 1, the least restrictive, with a curfew from midnight till 4 a.m. only. The international airports in Joburg, Cape Town, Durban, and in Mpumalanga have also been reopened. But we'd barely let our hair down and texted our friends to hang out again before the experts immediately predicted a third wave. Most reckon it'll happen around June or July, although some say it could be as early as May. That means we'll go into a stricter lockdown level again. Sigh. The vaccine rollout is happening in parallel, so it won't stop the third wave. Here's hoping that it will stop a fourth and fifth wave. Pretty please. In international news, remember when Sweden was all the rage amongst those arguing against the initial hard lockdown? Initially, the DA was particularly against the lockdown, as were the now largely discredited group of Panda, which this week was alleged to have links with global misinformation groups, according to a Daily Maverick investigation. At the time of those, hitting back at the lockdown's implications for the economy was obviously alarming, but hindsight shows that locking down was the right approach. Sweden is now warning it may go into its first lockdown amid a surge in COVID 19 cases. An independent commission, we're not the only ones, in Sweden, found that the country had failed to protect care home residents from the initial spread of the virus. In December, the country's king and its prime minister both admitted they felt the country's COVID 19 strategy had been a failure, given the large number of deaths, several times the number of confirmed cases and deaths of all neighboring Scandinavian countries. Looking on to the week ahead, seasoned broadcaster Kumar Brown died today of COVID 19 related causes. Expect to see several tributes and obituaries. She was a popular, if divisive, journalist who once controversially supported Jacob Zuma and held senior positions at respected titles and stations, although also at far more dubious ones like the Gupta's New Age newspaper and Iqbal Survey's independent newspapers. Although, to be fair to her, she walked out of the New Age days before it actually launched. Meanwhile, fans of royals Meghan and Harry are looking forward to their tell-all interview with Oprah Winfrey, scheduled for Sunday. It's being billed as the most important royal interview since Diana's infamously frank conversation in 1995 with the BBC's Martin Bashir. This as Harry's grandfather, Prince Philip, who is 99 years old, remains hospitalized and has reportedly undergone a medical procedure for a heart condition. Expect to hear more about that interview once it hits the airwaves on Sunday. It'll be locally aired on Monday at 7:30 p.m. on DSTV Channel 101. Also expect to watch the British press keep blaming the couple for any bad news to do with Prince Philip's death. Oh, I mean, not death, with his health, but possibly his death, given that he is 99 and in hospital. Ugh, bad timing for the royals. That's it from us and the rest of the team at Explain. Be sure to tell your friends to subscribe. Go to explain.co.za/subscribe. Till next week, goodbye from us.